Welcome again to this very special Decoding WSET Level 3 Specification webinar. I'm Gus. I've been teaching WSET qualifications from Level 1 to Diploma for 10 years in China and in the US. And in the past 5 years, I've also been teaching global candidates online for the diploma. So hopefully I know something about the WSET qualifications. All right, so today we have two questions to answer. The first question is actually, why do I do a webinar on this level 3 specification, right? Why do I do this? And the second question is the main question to solve, is how to decode the level 3 specification. So let's do it. Okay, why do I do such webinar? It sounds a bit strange, to be honest, but actually you'll find out that the level 3 specification is really important. So first of all, I am not a WSET program provider by myself. In the past 10 years, I've been teaching for other program providers, which means that for me, I cannot just teach the content of WSET. I need to teach for other institutes. But the WSET Level 3 or the specifications for all levels, they are free resources for you, for everybody to download. Meaning, whether or not you are learning WSET, whether or not you are a WSET program provider, everybody can use this material to understand what is WSET and what each level of WSET is about. So in case you don't know anything about WSET, the most reliable and authoritative information is written in the specifications. So I'm sorry to say, don't listen to people's anecdotal experience all the time about WSET, because the most reliable information is not from Gus, not from some other people. It's always from WSET official specifications and materials. So you just go to wsetglobal.com, search for qualifications that and level 3 in wines, and download the specification. And also they have another free material for people to use, which is the systematic approach to tasting, their tasting system for people to reference. So they actually provide these really useful materials for everybody. And often people ignore them. That is why today I want to emphasize the importance on them, especially the specification. All right, we start with education, wine education in general, and see why it is important to look at this specification. So we have many, many wine qualifications floating around there, right, all over the world. We can have, like for me, I had a viticulture and enology degree with UC Davis, which is more about knowing how to grow grapes and do winemaking. But also, we have other commercial wine qualifications, and they are the most popular ones around the world, such as WSET, Court of Master Sommelier, Society of Wine Educators, right? Wine Scholar Guild. They are all great qualifications, and people pursue them, people learn from them, and people move the ladders in the wine industry. However, one thing I found about the way most people thinking about the exam is kind of strange, okay? For some reason in the wine world, especially when people learn commercial wine qualifications, they consider this kind of things as it's all about memorization, okay? The more names I know, the better I will become in dealing with the exams. But actually, for each qualification, the exam system is different. And even within WSET, in different levels of WSET, the way they test you is different. So in order to deal with the exams, in order not to fail the exams, we have to understand the exam system. And where do we find the information about how they test you in the exam? Well, it's all explained in the specifications in WSET system. All right, so for each qualifications, we have different ways of doing exams, dealing with the exams, and the different ways of learning. That is why I want to do a webinar on specification, because in the WSET system, the specification tells you what they expect in the exam. And you will see that it's not only about memorizing the factual knowledge, the names, it's also about developing skills. Okay, so don't worry about this for now. I will explain them more in detail. Okay, so why the exam systems are different? Well, I want to give you an example. Okay, so if you look at different qualifications, we have different purposes. Again, like me, I learned viticulture and enology from UC Davis. That is because I want to know the scientific side of wines. And maybe I want to do some winemaking at some point. All right, that is the focus of those kind of university degrees. However, if you do other qualifications, like if you want to become a sommelier, you want to do qualifications like quarter master sommelier, these kind of qualifications. Why? Because their focus is to really help sommeliers to deal with the on-trade in the restaurant situations. When you are facing clients in the restaurants, there's no time for you to give like long stories or long explanations of things like academics. So you need to give people brief stories to enlighten their experience. You need to give quick tips on food and wine pairings to help clients, help the diners to enjoy the food and wine better. You need to have these kind of quick factual records and short explanations to really help consumers understand and enjoy their meals and enjoy their wines. And that is why if you look at most of the sommelier-focused exam systems, their exams is all about is more about factual recall and explanations, brief explanations of things. Okay, it's about the breadth of knowledge. However, if you look at other systems such as UC Davis, winemaking degrees, those kind of things, or sometimes WSET systems, it's more academic focus. So you really need to sit down and write things and write essays or write short answers to evaluate situations, to explain stuff in detail. And sometimes you even need to use the knowledge you've learned and apply them to real life situations. For example, you learn about how yeast behave in the class. Now, you also need to use what you learned about yeast to deal with real situations when the yeast are not working during fermentation when you're making wines, such as stuck fermentation. Okay, those are more academic approach of learning and testing students because we want to write essays or solve real life issues. And for WSET level 3 and level 4, they are the higher levels of WSET. So it is more academic, and we'll see how it is explained in the specifications. Okay, so that is why I want to do this webinar. It is because the specifications tells you what the exam is expecting, what this system is about. So some candidates fail the level 3 exam because they think it's all about using flashcards and memorizations. No, it's not only about that, okay? The specification never wrote it's all about memorization for level 3. And you will find WSET Level 3 exam so much easier by understanding the specification. And that is from my 10 years of WSET teaching experience. All right, so that's the first problem. Now let's deal with the big question. How to decode the Level 3 specification. I have to say, if you just read it, okay, you just skim through the specification, you probably will miss some important informations or implications over there in terms of how to learn and how to deal with level 3 exams. So I want to decode it to let you understand the details, okay? So first of all, read it. You have to read it, okay? Please read the specification. It's a very helpful material because I give you these kind of examples. On page 6 of specification, it tells you what is WSET. Okay, lots of people don't understand what is WSET. Okay, it is actually a non-profit organization, charitable organization to help the wine industry, blah, 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 and the spirit industry. And they also have sake now. Okay, so they provide you all this kind of information in the specifications. Also, on page 8, it tells you what is level 3. And on page 23, they have recommended tasting samples. For example, if you learn the WSET online, you have to use their recommended tasting sample list to buy those wines and taste on yourself. Okay, otherwise, if you just do online learning without tasting, it's unlikely that you can pass the exam. Also, they have the examination guidance. They even have sample questions to help you. Okay, so read the specification. But there are some things, as I mentioned, it's easy to ignore. Okay, and it's easy not to read them carefully, but you do need to read them carefully. So I'm going to emphasize on those kind of things, especially for the theory part. For tasting, I'm not going to spend too much time on it in this webinar because for tasting, there's no way I can solve all the tasting problems with a 1 hour webinar. Okay, you have to taste to learn all the things about wine, to learn anything about wine, to learn any wine qualifications. You have to taste, 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 and taste. But my suggestion for you for tasting is for WSET, if you learn this, you use their vocabulary. All right, I see lots of people fail the tasting exam is because they think, oh, they can use any terms to describe wines. For example, they use the terms that they learned probably from the SOMS systems. They say, oh, this wine has like a star bright hue with this kind of straw color, blah, blah, blah. No, you have to use the WSET terms. You have 0 points if you use the other terms, okay? For example, they say color of white wines. Yellow is not a choice. If you describe yellow for any white wines, there's 0 mark awarded. All right, so my only suggestion for now for your tasting is you have to strictly follow their tasting system. And you will see it many times. And when you learn the level 3, you will taste every single wine using their tasting system. So it's on page 2 on the specification, and you have a feeling about it by reading it. And also this tasting system is available on the WSET website. That is enough for the tasting, okay? This is not tasting training. I want to explain about theory part. For theory, there are 2 parts. Part 1 comprises of 50 multiple choice questions. Now for the multiple choice questions, this is about testing the breadth of knowledge. It's more about memorization. We'll talk about it later, okay? But guess which part that people tend to fail in the exam? is part 2, is the short written answer questions. Again, because for some reason, lots of people, from what I can see, thinks that the wine world is all about memorizing all the names, so that they kind of ignore the application of knowledge. They don't have the ability to explain things. But this part 2, short written answers, is all about application of knowledge and explain things. All right? And you have to achieve at least 55%. You have to get 55% of your answers correct in order to pass this exam. And that is minimum 55% for each part. Honestly, that's not that hard. Right? We have a joke in China. We say, oh, you passed level 3 or you passed WSET qualifications, right? You achieve 55% to at least to pass it. But honestly, you could get 45% wrong, but still pass the exam. So that's not that hard. What you do need to do for most people is to pay attention on part 2, the short written answers, on top of memorizing the knowledge. So it's not only about memorization. Again, it's not only about that. You do need to use flashcards, or you do need to memorize things, the names, the grape variety, the regions, blah, blah, blah. But you also need to have the skills of explaining how and why in the short written answer questions. Okay, so as I mentioned, in the typical vintage, okay, in a typical year, usually the global pass rate of level 3 is only 60 to 70%. So it's not a very good pass rate, right? You could have 40% of the global candidates fail the level 3. And which part they fail? Short written answer questions. And that is our focus for today's webinar. Okay, now let me help you to read that part. On page 10 to 21, it's all about what kind of knowledge and what kind of scope you need to learn for the theory part for level 3. Okay, it's all about the theory part. And also, they have lots of headlines. For these headlines, what they say is assessment criteria. When I teach WSET level 3 in the class, face-to-face to students, especially in America, I always say, hey, I'm Chinese. English is not my native language. You are English-speaking people. Tell me what's the meaning of assessment criteria, right? Well, lots of people just say, oh, of course, in English, it means that how the criteria, the standards they use to test you in the exam. And then I say, well, so why don't we read this assessment criteria in the specification, right? They already put out how they are gonna test you in the exam for the theory part over here. So you have to read it. But there's something interesting as you read these assessment criteria. If you read them, okay, let's say identify the key natural factors in the vineyard and explain in detail how they influence the style, quality, and price of the wine. Or they will say, identify the key human factors in the winery and explain how they influence the style, quality, and price of the wines. Or they say, identify key factors in the vineyard, winery, law, and commerce involved in still wine production and briefly explain how they influence the style, quality, and price of the wines. Or they will say, identify and locate the principal fortified wines around the world and describe the style and quality of the wines. If you read them again and again and again, if you read all the assessment criteria, you will find out that for most of the assessment criteria, or shall I say, for most of the theory questions for the short written answer part. It is actually mostly about you describe the quality and the style of the wines first. And then you use the factors to explain the wine style and quality. And again, I'm sorry to say it again and again, but when I see people struggle in their study or in their exams, especially for level 3 and level 4, it is because they don't know how to describe the wines using the WSET way. And also, more importantly, they don't know how to use the factors they learned to explain the wine style and the quality. And the specification actually emphasizes on that. I'll give you examples, all right? So when they ask people to describe wine styles, I'll give you a simple example. It's just like when we describe the style of a person or an object. For example, champagne has high acidity. That is the description of a wine style. Okay, high acidity is one stylistic element of champagne. It is just like me, Gus, has black hair. That is one of my style, right? If you describe what I look like, what Gus look like, he has black hair. All right. When they talk about using factors to explain the style, they're not expecting much. They're just expecting you to explain it briefly. What affects what causes what, or what factors influences what. For example, the climate in Champagne is very cold, very cool. That is a factor, okay? So that the grapes grown in Champagne and the resulting wines have naturally high acidity. And that is a style. By writing this simple sentence, you will find out, you will be able to explain the factor, the coolness of the climate influences the style, result in the high acidity in the Champagne grapes and Champagne wines. It is just like when I explain why I have a black hairstyle. That is because Gus is ethnic Chinese. That is a factor. He has Chinese genes, Asian genes, so that his hair is typically black. That is my style as part of the expression of Asian genes. All right? So it's all about using these simple sentences to explain what causes what. Okay? I suspect some people will have kids staying at home recently, right? And pay attention to what they are doing when their teachers assign the homework to them. I believe that some of the homework questions is like this. It's about you use basic factors to explain the simple phenomena in their daily life so that the kids will have skills to deal with problems in their life or in their exams or in the future in their work. Okay, so it's all about that. Now let's talk about the real questions in the exam. So the factors, if you don't know about it, you will learn about it, okay? The factors is mostly for WSET, it's about the grape varieties, the vineyard factors, right? Such as the climate, the slope, the soil, the water availability, the sunlight, blah, blah, blah. And also how people deal with grapes in the vineyard, such as how they harvest the grape, how they treat the diseases, those kind of things, how they train the vines. And also winery factors, such as how you make a white wine, how you make a red wine, how you make a rosé wine, how you make a sweet wine, blah, blah, blah. And honestly, for level 3, you're dealing mostly with the grape variety, the vineyard factors, and the winery factors. So if you look at your textbook, almost half of the content is about these factors. It's the first 2 parts of the textbook. It's all about the natural factors in the vineyard and the human factors in the winery. You use them to explain the wine style and quality. Occasionally, they also test you about regulations, right? Such as the AOP regions in Europe, in France, the PDO in the whole European Union concept, the regulations in certain wines that in Rioja for Spain, for Portugal, they have the Reserva, those kind of things, okay? Sometimes they test you on that, and sometimes they test you on why vintage champagne is very pricey, okay? The commerce part, the market part. But for most of the testing, they are focusing on the grape varieties, the vineyard, and the wineries. And this is why some of you or most students, they attend classes, because you don't need to attend classes to memorize stuff. You read the textbook, you make your flashcards, you memorize stuff. But when you attend classes, the tutors, the global WSET tutors, are actually emphasizing on the important factors. And also, they emphasize on how you use these kind of important factors to apply to what the wine tastes like, the style and the quality, the application of knowledge, the explanation of knowledge. Okay, so in the specification, they actually give you an example of short written answers questions. And I'm not giving you an absolute answer here. I'm gonna just use these as examples to let you have a feeling of how they structure the question in order to test you how to explain how the factors influences the styles and qualities. For example, on page 29, they give you exam-like questions, okay? The Chardonnay can grow in both cool and warm climates. A, give an example of one cool climate region and one warm climate region in Australia where Chardonnay is grown, and describe what impact the climate has on the fruit characteristics of the grapes. So you need to give a very short answer on giving 2 examples. One is a cool region in Australia. One is a warm region in Australia. And then briefly explain what impact the climate has on the fruit characteristics of the grapes. Okay, so when people look at these kind of questions, they will say, oh no, I forgot about Australia. Let me start to memorize everything about Australia again. All right, you actually don't need to do that. What you need to do is actually you think about the factors behind those kind of typical cool regions in Australia and typical hot regions in Australia, and sort of explain how the climate impact the fruit characteristics. Okay. For example, if you learn level 2, or if you pay attention just to at least one cool climate regions in Australia, you will know, oh, Yarra Valley, right? In Australia, in Yarra Valley, they make lots of sparkling wines. Domaine Chandon is also in Yarra Valley, right? So it's cool climate. But what you learn is not only the Yarra Valley, that name. You also think about why it has cool climate. Well, oh, it is because it's closer to the ocean. They have cold ocean over there. There's some ocean influence over there, cool ocean breezes. And also you think about the style of the wines over there. It's not only just cool climate in Australia. You think about cool climate regions in the United States, in South Africa, in Chile, the cool climate regions in Europe. They all share the same characteristics in terms of the fruit. With cool climate, it tends to express more citrus fruit or green fruit characteristics. Whereas in warm climate, if you give a region in Australia, like in Barossa, it tends to give fruit expressions of those kind of tropical fruit, because you would know that tropical fruit grows in warm climate, and somehow for warm climate grapes, for warm climate wines, they also explain more stone and tropical fruit characteristics. I'm not giving you answers here. I'm trying to giving you the way I want to learn about these kind of things. It's not only about just that name, Barossa Valley or Yarra Valley. It's about you think about the things around them, and to think about the cool climate and warm climate Chardonnay and fruit expressions in general. For example, then they talk about, hey, vertical shoot positioning is a trellising system often used for cool climate grapes, right? Explain why a grape grower would choose this system. And for these kind of questions, you will see that it's not about you just know what VSP looks like in terms of the training system, okay? You not only need to learn, it's about positioning all the this year's shoots upright, okay, vertically. It's also you need to know why they do this. It is because you will get more sun exposure, better ventilation, all those kind of things, so that you can ripen, get more sunlight, you can get more warmth to ripen Chardonnays in cool climate. Okay, again, I try not to give you the absolute answer here. You need to learn and think about the why and how in your studies. And then they have other questions like, oh, some Chardonnays can have the pronounced aromas of hazelnut, butter, toast, vanilla, these kind of things. Rich texture, full body. Now, if you see this kind of typical question, this is a question that I really like, is they force you to think about how and why, right? You need to identify and describe two techniques that leads to these kind of characteristics in winemaking and maturation, and explain what characteristics each technique contributes to the style of the wine. So when you learn about winemaking techniques, you need to learn their consequences. For example, malolactic fermentation, or more precisely nowadays, malolactic conversion, is about turning malic acid into lactic acid. But you also need to think about why people do that, why winemakers want to do that for Chardonnays, but not Rieslings, right? It is because such technique will turn the crispy acid into the softer lactic acid. So you have the rounder mouthfeel as expected, as people like in certain Chardonnays. It will also create butter, cream flavors. And you think about these kind of things, you'll be able to answer all these kind of questions, how each winemaking techniques influence the final style and quality. Same as oak. If you have new oak influence, you will have the toast and the vanilla flavors from the oak. And if you think about real life, okay, it's not only about, oh, this Chardonnay is buttery creamy, okay, you'll like it. But there are tons of choices of buttery creamy Chardonnays out there. And some consumers may not even like this kind of style anymore. So how will you actually persuade or explain to other people to try out different styles of Chardonnays? You need to explain it is because the malolactic conversion or the oak influence, the different degree of oak influence will help the wine achieve certain styles and qualities. And if you want to be a winemaker, you also know, oh, now I understand it is because of these kind of winemaking options that leads towards different styles. I want to do different trials and find out the style of Chardonnay that I want to make. And that is another thing I want to emphasize today is level 3 exam or some other qualifications, when you learn about them, it's not only about you know more. It's also about you know how to deal with real life problems. And level 3 is just the beginning to explain these kind of things. Okay? Same as some survey questions. In level 3, they will sometimes do a touch of the food and wine or survey things. You need to read the WSET textbook to understand that. They are never the majority of marks, okay? But if you want to achieve these marks, you need to know the rough serving temperature, those kind of things, how to decant wine, those kind of things. But it's never the majority of marks in the short written answer exams. But even for these kind of questions, it's not only about you know the serving temperature for different wines. Because if you want to know the serving temperature of certain wines, you need to understand the style of the wines and the quality of the wines. Right? For example, if a customer asks you to recommend a premium French Chardonnay that has these kind of characteristics, what would you recommend? Now you need to have the knowledge of what kind of French Chardonnays tend to have malolactic conversion, some rich texture maybe from lees aging, and also new oak characteristics of toast and vanilla. And by learning level 3, by learning WSET, by learning all these kind of wine qualifications, other wine qualifications, you will know that Merlot, as a typical village commune in Burgundy, tend to have new oak influence, lees influence, and they do malolactic conversion for most of the times. Okay, so now you put the knowledge together to apply these knowledge to real life conditions. If we want to be a sommelier, your manager will not explain every single wine on the list to you if you have a gigantic list. But by having the knowledge, you'll be able to predict. Now on our list, there are probably 10 old vintages of Pouilly-Limon Haché from different producers. But because I have the knowledge, knowing the general quality and style of old Pouilly-Limon Haché, they are oak influence, they are having this kind of great acid, but they still have rich body and all that. I know what kind of serving temperature I should do for these wines when I serve them to the customers. And if I know the quality and I know the price, if I ever sell a bottle of Pouilly-Limon Haché from Le Fleuve, all those kind of producers, hey, I make a lot of tips, right? So it's about applying those knowledge. But now some people might get worried because people will think, wow, do I really have to think about all these things for every single wine I encounter in level 3? No. Okay? That is, again, you need to read the specifications carefully. The specification will save you a lot of time if you read it. Itata Biobío, for example, is our regions in Chile, or even Malleco. They are mentioned in the textbook. They are described in the textbook. But these regions are not listed in your specification. It means that in the exam, they will not test you on Itata, Biobío, Malleco, those kind of regions. Okay, you only need to learn the wine regions and grape varieties as listed in the specification. And then there's another thing, okay? I know there's a lot of things, lots of information you need to memorize. But for certain wines, you only need to sort of memorize the information. You don't need to think about the grape growing, winemaking, everything around them. And those grape varieties and related regions are listed on page 15 and page 16 of the specification, of the current specification, okay? They say other grape varieties, and they are not in bold print. For example, if you look at this grape on page 15 or 16, I don't have the book at hand, so I don't know which page, but on page either 15 or 16, they listed Acertico. Okay, this grape is not in bold print, meaning they will not ask you the special basket training system of Acertico in Santorini in Greece. They will not ask you all about how you mature Acertico and different styles of Acertico. You have dry style, you also have oaked, unoaked style, Vincento style. Believe it or not, they have Vincento in Greece, those kind of sweet style of Acertico. No, you don't need to know all the details. You can try to learn them, but that's for diploma. That's for level 4. For level 3, you only need to know, oh, it's a white grape in Santorini, Greece. That's it. So in multiple choice questions, they might ask something like, which grape variety is used in Santorini, widely used in Santorini in Greece? They will list a bunch of grape varieties, and you will choose Acertico is the typical white grapes used in Santorini. And that's it. But for the letters in bold print on those pages, you need to know the factors, the important factors around them. Again, those factors are emphasized in textbook or in your classroom learnings. Okay? You need to know, for example, France, Bordeaux, Merlot. You need to be able to describe the style and the quality and explain all the factors that contribute to such style and quality. I'll give you an example here. Now, this example I'm giving is a premium Merlot, as you can find in regions like Pomerol, right? Like Petrus make the most expensive Merlot in the world. I give you a premium example over here. But also you need to be aware there are bulk, inexpensive, easier to drink Merlot produced in Bordeaux and elsewhere in the world. Okay, but I'm just giving you an example here. When you know, oh, there are different styles of Merlot, now I'm talking about the most premium example. They tend to be deep ruby, dry, high acid, higher tannin. Sometimes the acid could be lower if it's hot vintage, but that is the things you need to think about. Tannins could be a bit lower depending on how ripe it is and depending on how they extract the tannins, but they tend to be still dry, medium to high acid, high tannins, medium to high alcohol. Okay, I didn't write it here, but sometimes it could be really high alcohol in hot vintages, full-bodied with aromas of blackcurrant, black plum, or the cedar. And if it's aged, it also have leather, mushroom, forest floor, all those kind of flavors. Okay, when you learn WSET, you will be able to produce these kind of tasting notes. But let's not stop there. We also need to think, wow, why it is so deep in color? Well, that is because for premium Merlots in Bordeaux, you will have lots of extractions. People want to extract lots of tannins and the color and the flavor compounds from the skins during their winemaking. They also pick very ripe grapes in the vineyard, so they have this kind of really dark color. And the Merlot as a grape, when they are really ripe, they do show deep color as well. And also you need to know that, right on the right bank of Bordeaux, we also usually have a blend of Merlot and Cabernet Franc and some other varieties. They also introduce some other characteristics as well, right? So if you have a cool vintage and have lots of Cabernet Franc in your blend, other than Merlot, you tend to have higher acid. But if you encounter a warmer vintage, you tend to have more medium acid because the Merlot, when it's ripe, they tend to have lower medium acid rather than high acid. Tannins, I mentioned. Alcohol, again, in hotter vintages, you also have higher alcohol because you have more sugar in the grape when it's ripened, blah, 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 blah. And then you have these kind of aromas. For example, for cedar, it's also the aromas and flavors from the oak. New oak influence, that is because they tend to use oak for maturing the wines in Bordeaux, blah, blah, blah. Okay, again, I'm not giving you answers here. This is how you sort of need to learn in your level 3 for these kind of principal grape varieties and principal wine regions. Okay, again, you don't need to do this for Assyrtiko in Greece, but you need to do this for Merlot in Bordeaux, Cabernet Sauvignon in Bordeaux, right? So don't forget, when you learn about things, you need to be able to describe the style like here and the quality price as well. For example, don't assume all Bordeaux's are all premium wines. Bordeaux have lots of inexpensive wines. Generic Bordeaux red wines, Bordeaux Rouge, is basically mostly Merlot, and they tend to be inexpensive. And you also need to think about the factors behind them. Think about how you explain the style and the quality of generic Bordeaux Rouge. Attention, okay, we're almost there, but attention, okay. All sparkling and fortified wines are in bold print. This is the one thing I dare say is that from my observation, lots of students don't study very hard on sparkling and fortified wines. Well, sparkling wines are very important. Fortified wines, even today, they're still very important. Okay, so you need to understand port and sherry. You need to understand champagne, cava, prosecco, and all the new world sparkling wines. Right? So when you learn about sparkling and fortified wines, you also need to think about all the factors behind them. It's like why champagne has high acidity, as I mentioned, as I give you an example on, and why champagne has those kind of rich, yeasty, toasty, those kind of aromas, right? You need to think about why those kind of why champagne has those kind of toasty, yeasty influence in the wine. It is because of the autolysis. You need to learn about those kind of factors. Fortified wines, why we have three different styles of port in basically, and different styles of sherry, lots of them. It is all because of the different maturation techniques. Okay, maturation shortly in big vessels, or long time maturation in small vessels, or biological aging or oxidative aging. You need to learn about them. And to be frank, level 3, I know some people say, oh, we learned so much about fortified wines or sparkling wines. Honestly, it's not much information. It's just in our daily life, depending on which market you are in. Probably you never pay enough attention on those kind of wines, but they are important and you need to learn about them. Okay, so fortified wines, sparkling wines, you need to know the style, quality, and explain why they have such style and quality using all the winemaking factors, grape variety factors, vineyard factors. Okay, I'll give you a brief example over here for vintage port. Well, you should know vintage port is always absolutely high quality. Why? Because it's always made from the best year, the ripest year, so you have the best quality fruit, and the style is sweet, high alcohol, high tannin, high everything, very concentrated. And why is that? You need to think about how they extract the tannins and color from the grapes, how they fortify the wines to achieve the sweetness and high alcohol, and how they have the potential to age in the bottle for decades and decades. All right, think about how and why. Why such style? Why such quality? Okay, so that's mostly it. Okay, so today, probably there's a lot of information, especially that you haven't even studied level 3 yet, but you can pick up the specification or pick up any wine education materials. But from today on, think about using some factors to briefly explain why different wines have such style, quality, and price point. Okay, so you can forget lots of things for today, or you can review the recorded video I'm doing at the moment. But most importantly, 2 takeaway messages. 1 is study the specification. 2 is like before, during, and even after level 3 study. Develop a habit using factors to explain the style, quality, and price of the principal wines of the world. And personally, I believe that if you do so, if you're working in the wine industry, you'll be able to improve your skills. And if you're not working in the wine industry, it can actually enhance your enjoyment of wines because you have all the rich context behind the wines. And also in social gatherings, you'll be able to talk more and share more with your friends. Okay, so it is really I think having real life significance. So not only we want to deal with the exams, but also as an educator, I really hope everybody gets lots of knowledge, lots of experience, and lots of happiness from this way of thinking and learning. But of course, I'm not denying on the importance of memorization. You do need to memorize and taste lots of wines in order to improve your knowledge and skills in the wine world. And that's it. Cheers. Thank you very much. If you have any questions later, you can write an email to me, courses@guszhu.com.